So if we break that down, what we have is a 1-4-5 in any key that's major, and a 2-3-6 in any key that's minor. So what you're left with is 6 essential chords in virtually any blues, rock, pop, country song that are useful to you. So if you were trying to learn something by ear and you thought it was in the key of G, okay, and again, you're going to use the tools that we've already talked about in terms of finding which chord is your home base chord, okay? But once you've established that home base chord, then what we need to do is we need to span out and think, well, what logically would come after that? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to try and attach on to our concept of hearing the difference between major and minor, like we talked about earlier. When you're listening to a chord progression, you want to be able to hear the difference between that major chord and minor chord. So you got to keep working on these things because they all tie together. So if we hear that it's a major chord, then we have to think to ourselves, okay, if we're in the key of G, what would the 4 and the 5 be? Well, G, A, B, C, or D. So logically then, we would try a C chord or try a D chord. Now what I always like to do is I'd be listening to the song and then I'll pause it. And then I'll go back and I'll listen to that same part and I'll pause it. It doesn't do me any good to listen to 2.5 minutes of the song because I can't remember what I was doing in the first 5 seconds, right? So it's easier for me just to listen to the beginning and then pause it. Then I establish those first couple of chords that I'm hearing. Okay, it's G to D, right? Or whatever it's going to be. Okay, now as I'm listening further, I hear a new chord pop up. Okay, so now I'm going, okay, well, what is that new chord going to be? Okay, well, it's C. Okay, that's fine. It was major, it sounded major, so I plug it in there. And then we hear a new chord come up, and this is the most important part that you have to remember, is that new sound that we're hearing isn't really new, it's a recurring sound that we heard before. And most importantly, it's our home base, so we hear that G come up again. So as we're listening to the beginning of this part, okay, this hypothetical song, we're hearing 4 changes, but we have to be aware that we're really only hearing 3 chords. It's just that the last change is actually the first chord all over again. So the more you do this, the more you start hearing that 1, the 4, and the 5. You know, G, C, and D, and G. You know, you've heard that sound a million times. So what we were doing in the beginning of this course was we were analyzing each individual chord and listening to the sound of that chord. What sound does it make, right? And your ability to identify that either A, it's major or minor, or B, it sounds like a G chord, or it sounds like a C chord, or it sounds like a D chord, that sort of thing. So right now what we're doing is we're using our process of elimination and thinking, okay, if this song is in the key of G, and I hear a major chord, and it's not G, it's got to be C or it's got to be D. Okay? Now on the other side of it, we have those 3 minors that we just got done discussing, which was the 2, the 3, and the 6. Okay? So if we're in the key of G, you have A minor, you have B minor, and you have E minor, which is your 6th chord. Okay? So always remembering that the 1, the 4, and the 5 are used a lot. Okay? And the 6th chord is used a lot as well. The 2 and the 3 are used, but like what I do is, again, in my process of elimination, is I always think, okay, if I hear a minor chord, the first one I'm going to try is the 6th chord. And if it doesn't work, then I'm going to try the 2 and the 3. But more times than not, I'm going to be correct on that 6th chord because it just really is a common thing. So let's take a look at, like, for instance, an old blues or doo-wop style, Motown maybe, style chord progression. I was doing something like this. Okay, what I've got there is a 1, 6, 4, 5 in the key of G. 1, 6, 4, 5. G, E minor, C, and D. And always keep in mind, the key doesn't have to be G. It doesn't matter what key you're in. You're always going to wind up with a major 1, 4, 5 and a minor 2, 3, 6 as your ear training palette to choose from to figure out how the chords go. So the best thing is once you've got kind of an idea of how these 6 chords are going together, you practice them over and over and over. There's a song by Bob Dylan called Like a Rolling Stone. It's a great song to look at if you have the time and the availability because it uses all 6 of those chords. very effectively, I might add. So you're in the key of C for that particular song, and you're using all 6 chords. So check that one out if you get a chance, but really start trying to figure out how you're going to utilize these 6 chords along with everything else that we've discussed at this point to start really truly developing your ear to hear 2 things. Not only the difference between major and minor, but being able to hear the chords, a 1 to a 4 or a 1 to a 5, right? Or a 1 to a 6 or those sorts of things. And it just comes with time and practice.